We go first to Indian students arriving in New Zealand with fraudulent documents. As up to 150 of them face deportation, we can reveal that the agent a significant number of them used to get into New Zealand is still working, and that he offered a student who went to see him as recently as last Monday the same services and the same kind of document fraud. The Indian student market is worth $600 million a year to New Zealand, but it's plagued by fraud. Immigration New Zealand documents prepared as part of a no surprises briefing in February describe, and I quote, significant organised financial document fraud. The students facing deportation claim they had no idea their agents were acting fraudulently. The government, as we'll hear later, rejects that. But Immigration New Zealand in its briefing says that, and I quote, of particular concern is the fact that some of India's most successful agents are using this fraud. That quote is from earlier this year. Since then, visa rejections have increased, meaning more fraud is being caught in India, but it appears some of the agents involved are still offering the same fraudulent services. This audio was recorded last Monday, a week ago today, in the Indian city of Hyderabad.
78.
A student is visiting the offices of popular agent Kiwi Overseas.
Inter 78.
An Immigration New Zealand document dated exactly 7 months ago today describes an investigation, and I quote, into Indian student applicants from Hyderabad, which has uncovered significant organised financial document fraud by a number of Hyderabad student agents.
74, sir. 74.
One of those agents is Kiwi Overseas. And according to Immigration New Zealand, and I quote, Kiwi Overseas are heavily involved in this fraud. In a long recorded conversation, the agent tells the student New Zealand is easier than Australia to get into, easier to get permanent residency in, and then he offers to help provide bank documents which will show money the student doesn't actually have.
US, Canada, Australia, England, UK, Europe, and so on.
Now, why is this advisor important? Well, 12,000 kilometres away in New Zealand, many of the Indian students now facing deportation from here as a result of providing fraudulent documents used this agent. It appears he's still practising, he's still doing the same thing, and he's still sending people to New Zealand. Alistair McClymont is the lawyer representing the students in New Zealand.
So they asked some of their friends to go into the same education agency because they assumed that the agency must have been closed down by Immigration New Zealand. That wasn't the case. They walked in there and it was business as usual. Same agent was there. He's still promoting New Zealand. He's still promoting exactly the same schools. So it's business as usual.
When was this?
Last week.
So your students are being deported from New Zealand because they have effectively provided fraudulent paperwork through the same agent who is still operating and still placing students in New Zealand and hasn't been closed down.
Most of the agencies. There was another agency identified in the Immigration New Zealand document at the beginning of the year who had 50 applications that had fraudulent documents. You can go on the Google the website now. You'll see that the agency is still operating, and they're not only promoting New Zealand private schools, but New Zealand polytechnics and New Zealand universities.
Documents given to Checkpoint show just how widespread this fraud is. I quote from Immigration New Zealand's Mumbai office in February of this year. All of Hyderabad's 8 top agents were using this fraud, some for almost all of their applicants. So, how does it work? Well, students need money to come to New Zealand, but some don't have it, or can't prove they have it.
So the agent will take the bank statements and they'll think, there's a much better way of doing this. How about I put in a bank loan document instead? Immigration New Zealand will look at the bank loan document and go, great, that's fine, student visa, done, 3 or 4 days.
But the bank loan document is fraudulent.
Yeah, it's fake.
And students with those documents are now being deported. But their lawyer says the agent put the documents in, not them, and the students who hired the agents trusted them. Naive, convenient, disingenuous. Well, the students weren't alone in that trust. Another agent from another part of India is also identified by Immigration New Zealand as, and I quote, using this fraud. But last month, he received a formal licence from the New Zealand Immigration Advisors Authority. Yes, he is now a licensed immigration advisor. He has a licence from Immigration Advisors Authority, New Zealand, even though he's previously been identified as being involved in fraud.
So Immigration New Zealand documents earlier in the year identified this person as having been involved with fraudulent documents, and now 1 month ago Immigration Advisors Authority give him an immigration advisor's licence.
Which means that he has real credibility in India, doesn't he? And
Absolutely.
So he can say, I am approved by New Zealand, which gets him more work.
Yes, there's maybe a dozen or so licensed immigration advisors out of 2,200 unlicensed education agents. So he's got a very high status now.
How has that happened?
I would presume because Immigration Advisors Authority and Immigration New Zealand just simply don't talk to each other.
Meanwhile, students who provided fraudulent documents from agents like him are being deported. Alistair McClymont, who's acting for some of them, says they simply didn't know the agents they trusted were committing fraud. But, well, as I put it to him, that's not how the government sees it. We had Stephen Joyce in here after the students, and he sat in precisely the seat you're sitting in, and he said to me, and he said to our listeners, and he said to the students, I'm really sorry, but you provided fraudulent documents. I'm not, he seemed to be saying, entirely persuaded that you didn't know they were fraudulent. You got to go home. What do you say to him?
Well, what about Filipino dairy workers who came into New Zealand with fraudulent documents? They obtained work visas. Most of the documents were about their own work experience, so a lot of them didn't even have any experience as dairy workers, and they were allowed to stay. Immigration New Zealand issued a directive to the staff to ignore the fact that they had previously provided fraudulent documents. We had another situation a couple of years ago with Chinese students, identical to the current Indian student situation, and while a lot of them probably did go back to China, clients we represented were allowed to stay because Immigration New Zealand recognised that they didn't know about the fraudulent documents. So there's one rule for Filipino dairy workers on South Island dairy farms. There was another rule for Chinese students a few years ago, but it doesn't apply to the Indian students.
So the fraud seems to keep occurring, the agents seem to keep practising, one even with added credibility and value as a result of a recently granted New Zealand licence. And while visa rejections have increased, suggesting increased vigilance in India, students keep arriving with fraudulent documents, paying their fees, settling into New Zealand life, and then getting caught and getting sent home. So we know these agents provide fraudulent documents.
Yes.
New Zealand knows this.
Immigration New Zealand knows that the agents provide the fraudulent documents.
And as a result of that, we are chucking the students out
Yes.
who have paid their fees, come
Yes.
to New Zealand, but we're still letting the agents operate.
Yes.
And are we putting any advisories up about them? Are we saying don't deal with these
Yes,
people?
Immigration New Zealand notified all of the schools that who the agents were who were producing the fraudulent documents. So the schools know as well, but the schools continue to use the same agents.
Because they're revenue
Because they're making $600 million out of the Indian student market
every year.
every year.
Alistair McClymont, after 6 we're going to talk to Immigration Minister Michael Woodhouse. Now, he says the number of visas being rejected up in India has increased sharply. They are onto these agents and they are doing something about it. He will join us after 6.